My name is Margaret Hayes, and the afternoon my mother-in-law Dorothy sat down in a marriage counselor's office and opened a blue folder on the table between us. I already knew the folder was wrong. Not because I had seen what was inside it. Because I had spent 14 years as a certified public accountant, and I know what documentation assembled for accuracy looks like, and I know what documentation assembled for an audience looks like, and those two things are not the same. Accurate financial documentation comes from an institution. It comes on official letterhead with authentication codes and account verification and the institution's seal. What Dorothy brought to that table was paper she had chosen, organized, and presented in an order designed to tell a story. I recognized the structure before she said the first word. She pressed the folder flat with both hands, and she said the sentence she had been constructing, I believe, for the better part of a year. Paul, she has been taking from us. I have the proof. I have been watching this for months. I want to tell you what happened in the hours and months that followed, because what Dorothy did not know that afternoon was that I had also been watching. And that watching, for a certified public accountant, looks very different from what she had imagined it to be. Welcome to NS Revenge Stories, where we tell quiet, true-to-life stories about the moment a woman discovers that the evidence assembled to destroy her is also the clearest map to who assembled it. If someone has ever tried to use your own name as a weapon against you, this story is for you. Subscribe below and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. I read every one. Let me take you back far enough to understand the shape of Dorothy Hayes before I tell you what she built. Dorothy was the kind of person who understood social architecture the way engineers understand load-bearing walls. She knew which relationships in a room needed reinforcing and which ones, weakened carefully and over time, would cause a structure to shift in the direction she needed it to shift. She had spent 30 years building her son Paul into a man who trusted her instincts about people, which meant she had spent 30 years being very selective about which instincts she allowed him to see. She was not dramatic. She was never obviously cruel. She was patient and specific, and she understood, at a level that I came to deeply respect even as I was working to undo her methods, that the most effective way to undermine a person is not to attack them, but to make the people they love uncertain about them. Uncertainty is quieter than accusation. Uncertainty does not have to justify itself. And Dorothy had been cultivating uncertainty about me and her son for the better part of 2 years before she carried that blue folder into a counselor's office. I had noticed it the way I notice most things, in the pattern before the substance. The way Paul's responses to my explanations had a half-second delay they had not had in the first year of our marriage. The way he started asking where I had been in a tone that was a question, and something else underneath the question at the same time. The way he began to mention his mother's observations about things she could only have known by asking him specific questions about our daily life, which meant he had been answering specific questions about our daily life, which meant someone had been asking them. I did not conclude anything from these observations immediately. I filed them. I have always filed things. It is what I do with information I cannot yet use. Paul and I had married 3 years before the blue folder arrived. I was 36 and he was 39, and we had met at a professional conference in a way that sounds unremarkable in the telling, but had felt, at the time, like encountering someone whose particular frequency of attention matched yours in a way you had not known to expect. He was a structural architect. He thought spatially the way I thought numerically, and there was an ease between us that I had not experienced in any earlier version of my adult life. I thought, when I married him, that I was choosing a partnership. What I had not fully understood was that I was also entering an existing structure that someone else had been building for 30 years and had no intention of letting me alter. Dorothy met me 4 months in. She was gracious and attentive, and she asked questions with the focused precision of a woman who valued information and knew exactly what to do with it once she had it. I thought she was interested in me. I was not wrong about that. I was wrong about the nature of the interest. By year 2, the texture of our marriage had changed in ways I could feel, but not yet name precisely. Paul had begun asking me to account for purchases he had never questioned before. Not in an accusatory way. In a careful, reasonable way that felt, the first few times, like ordinary financial communication. He asked about a charge on our joint account. He asked if I had moved anything from savings that month. He mentioned his mother had been reading about how financial manipulation in marriage often begins with small, unremarkable transactions. He said it gently, as though sharing useful information and not a sentence that had been placed in his mouth. I told him the explanation for each thing he asked about. He received my explanations with a nod that was acknowledgement, but not quite belief. I noticed the difference. I am a CPA. I understand financial records the way a structural engineer understands load. I know where weight is carried, and I know what a record looks like when it has been constructed to suggest something the underlying numbers do not support. What I understood, after 4 months of these careful and escalating questions, was that someone had been studying our financial life well enough to identify the transactions that would be difficult to explain quickly to a non-specialist. Bank transfers between our own accounts that looked, without context, like money moving out. Routine expenses in amounts large enough to seem significant to someone without experience reading household finance. Whoever was feeding Paul these questions knew enough about how financial records looked to a layperson to design questions around the appearances rather than the realities. I did not confront Paul. I did not confront Dorothy. I opened a personal file on my own computer, and I began keeping a record of our complete financial life in the format I use for client documentation. Every transaction, every account, every date and amount and corresponding receipt and explanation. Complete, sourced, verified, timestamped. Not because I expected to need it for a specific purpose. Because I am a CPA and complete records are the natural output of a person who processes information in the way that I process it. And because something in my professional instinct had decided it was time to be very deliberate about the precision of my own paper trail. Dorothy brought the blue folder to the counselor's office 8 months after I started the file. Inside were 12 pages. They had the appearance of bank statements. The account was in my name. It had my social security number in the header. And across the 18 months covered by the statements, it had received a series of deposits that totaled, when I calculated in my head at the counselor's table, just over $41,000. Paul looked at the statements. Dorothy looked at her hands in the patient way of someone performing reluctance about something they have been planning for a long time. She said, "I did not want to bring this here. But Paul needed to know. The account is in Margaret's name. The transfers all came from your joint accounts on dates when Margaret had access to the online banking portal. I have been sitting with this for months, and I believe your husband and your marriage deserve the truth." Paul said my name once as a question, the way you say someone's name when you need to hear them answer it. I said, "May I see those documents?" I read all 12 pages the way I read every financial document, from the account header through the last transaction line of the last statement. And here is what I found before I reached the bottom of page 2. The account was real. My social security number on it was real. The transfers into it were real. What was not real was that I had opened it. I knew this not from memory alone, but from methodology. I have opened bank accounts. I know what the opening process requires and what documentation it generates and what information appears in which fields of a properly executed account opening form. What Dorothy had brought was transaction history only. There was no opening documentation in the folder. And the transaction history, read carefully, contained 2 details that should not have been there if I had opened and managed this account myself. The contact phone number in the account header was not my phone number. I have had the same phone number for 9 years. And the mailing address used at account opening, which appeared in very small print in the upper right corner of page 1, was not our home address. It was an address I recognized immediately. It was Dorothy's address before she relocated 18 months ago, which meant someone with access to that address had used it when opening this account, and the account had been opened while that address was still active. I set the statements down. I said I would like to take these home and review them properly. I said it in the tone I use when I have found a discrepancy and need to continue my analysis before speaking to conclusions. Dorothy said she thought we should discuss them now. I said, Dorothy, these are financial documents and I am a certified public accountant. I would like 48 hours with them. Paul said he thought that was reasonable. Dorothy looked at me across the counselor's table, and I watched something pass across her face. It was brief, and she controlled it quickly. But it was the expression of a person who has just noticed that what they believed was a closed door has been standing open for some time. If you are watching this and you have ever been handed evidence designed to convict you that was also, on close reading, a map to the person who fabricated it, drop a comment below. And subscribe to NS Revenge Stories, because what I found in the 12 months that followed is the reason I am here telling you this story instead of a different one. I retained Helen, a family law attorney with 20 years in financial discovery, and I brought her everything. The 12 pages Dorothy had provided. My own complete financial records, which by this point encompassed 8 years of documented transactions across every account I had managed in our marriage, formatted in the client reporting style I used professionally. And a specific request, full account documentation on the account in my name, obtained through proper legal channels. The account documentation arrived 3 weeks later. What it contained confirmed what I had identified at the counseling table. The account had been opened using my name and social security number. The signature on the opening form was not mine. I have a particular and consistent signature that I have applied to thousands of professional documents over 14 years. The signature on this form had the correct initial letter shapes, but was constructed from someone else's handwriting with my letter forms approximated. It was a skilled approximation made by someone who had access to examples of my signature. What it was not was my signature. The contact phone number was a prepaid device, purchased with cash, which meant there was no account associated with it. The email address used at opening had been created 2 months before the account opened and used for nothing else before or after. The mailing address was Dorothy's former residence, and the IP address from which the account had been accessed most frequently throughout its operation, obtained through Helen's discovery request, resolved to a location consistent with Dorothy's neighborhood. I want to tell you about the meeting at Helen's conference table because it is the moment this story turns. Paul was there with his own attorney. Dorothy was there with an attorney of her own. Helen had arranged the space so that the documents I had prepared would be presented in order. Dorothy arrived with the blue folder again and additional materials she had printed. She had a timeline she had constructed showing dates she described as Margaret's withdrawals from our shared financial life. She pressed it flat on the table with both hands the same way she had at the counselor's office. The gesture was the same. The posture was the same. The certainty in her face was the same. I had 3 documents. I set the first one on the table. The account opening documentation from the bank, showing the address, phone number, email, and signature that were Dorothy's rather than mine. The second was my complete financial record. 8 years. Every account. Every transaction. Every source documented and every amount verified. Formatted the way I format client reports, which means organized to survive audit, which means organized by a person who has never needed to hide what the records show because there was nothing in them to hide. $41,000 was not among the outgoing amounts. It had never left our accounts in the direction Dorothy had suggested. It had moved to an account that was opened without my knowledge and operated without my participation. The third was a notarized handwriting sample. My signature, taken freshly before a notary, beside an enlargement of the signature on the fraudulent account opening form. I had asked a forensic document examiner to annotate the comparison. The annotations identified 7 structural differences between the two signatures. The examiner's professional opinion, attached to the third document, was that the signatures were not produced by the same individual. I did not make a speech. I laid 3 documents on the table, and I let them speak in the way that documents speak when they are accurate, which is completely and without qualification. Dorothy looked at the account opening documentation. She looked at the address that was hers. She looked at her own attorney, and then at the signature comparison with its 7 annotated differences. And then she said, for the second time, the sentence that had been the foundation of everything she built. Paul, she has been taking from us. I have the proof. The first time she had said it, in a counselor's office with a husband who had been prepared for months to hear it, the sentence had been a weapon. It had cost me a year of my marriage and a deposition room and a divorce filing. The second time she said it, across a conference table from a forensic document comparison and a notarized handwriting sample and a bank's own account opening records with her address in the header, the sentence was not a weapon anymore. It was the most complete self-portrait she had ever produced. Because a person who repeats an accusation in the presence of evidence that the accusation was constructed has just told you, in the clearest possible language, who they are. Dorothy's attorney requested a recess. I do not know what was said in that room. What I know is what happened in the months that followed. The bank's fraud investigation team confirmed the account had been opened without my authorization. The funds that had moved through it were traced and accounted for. A report was filed with the appropriate regulatory bodies, and Dorothy retained separate legal counsel for that matter. The divorce settlement proceeded on the basis of the documented financial record I had maintained, which left nothing ambiguous and required no interpretation. I kept my name. I kept my career. I kept the file I had started 8 months before the blue folder arrived, which by the time the matter was resolved contained more complete financial documentation than most small businesses maintain. And I kept the blue folder itself. Helen offered to return it, and I said I would like to have it. Not as a reminder of anything I need to remember. As the most accurate single document of who Dorothy was, assembled by her own hands and pressed flat on 2 separate tables by a woman who understood social architecture very well and financial documentation not quite well enough. Paul and I do not speak. I do not experience this as ongoing grief. I experience it as the relationship having reached its accurate size, which was smaller than I had believed and more honest than what we had been performing. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had been shaped for 39 years by someone who was very skilled at shaping, and that shaping had consequences he may spend the rest of his life understanding. In the deposition room, when he saw the account opening documents with his mother's address in the header, he said, I didn't think she would do that. Not I didn't know. I didn't think. The distinction tells you everything. He had always known what she was capable of. He had chosen, for decades, not to look directly at it. That choice and its consequences belong to him. The documentation belongs to me. Here is what 14 years of professional record-keeping and 1 year of personal record-keeping taught me in combination. A person who believes you cannot read a document has told you exactly how much they respect you. Dorothy believed, when she assembled the blue folder and carried it to a counselor's office, that she was the only person in that room who understood what financial records could be made to say. She did not know that she had married her son to a person for whom financial records are a mother tongue. She did not know that I had been keeping my own file for 8 months. She did not know that the address she had used when opening a fraudulent account in my name was visible, in small print, in the upper right corner of the first page she put in front of me. She did not know any of these things because she had decided, at some point in the years before that Tuesday afternoon, that she already understood what I was. She had decided I was the kind of woman who could be managed with paper, and she had been right about that in a way she had never anticipated. I can be managed with paper. I have spent my entire career managing paper. And the paper she brought me told me exactly where to look. Type the word folder in the comments if this story found you. Share it with someone who needs to hear that the most powerful thing you can keep is an accurate record of the truth. Subscribe to NS Revenge Stories, and I will see you in the next one.